The room was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. Machines stood around the hospital bed like silent guards, their soft beeping the only sign that life still moved forward. The man lying on the bed was known to the world as a powerful mafia boss, feared by many and respected by none. His real name was Victor Romano, but almost no one used it anymore. To the outside world, he was a criminal who finally met his end after a violent attack. To the doctors, he was a coma patient with little chance of waking up. But inside his still body, Victor was awake, aware, and listening to everything. He had chosen this silence on purpose. Years of ruling the underground had taught him that people reveal their true faces only when they believe you are powerless. Victor remembered the night he was brought into this hospital. Sirens, blood, pain, and then darkness. When he woke briefly during surgery, he heard doctors say his injuries were severe. That moment gave him an idea. If the world thought he was unconscious, no one would be careful with their words. Enemies, allies, even family would speak freely. So when he fully regained awareness, he stayed still. He did not move his fingers, did not open his eyes, and did not react to voices. He became a shadow in his own body. The silent room became his hiding place, a place where truth would come to him without force or threats. At first, many people came to see him. Men in expensive suits stood near his bed, pretending to be worried. Victor heard their whispers about money, territory, and who would take control if he never woke up. Some hoped he would die. Some feared he would live. Not one of them spoke his name with love. After a few days, they stopped coming. Even his distant relatives visited only once, standing far from the bed, uncomfortable and impatient. Victor felt no sadness. He had expected this. His life had been built on fear, not connection. Still, the quiet that followed felt deeper than he imagined. Like a mirror showing him how alone he truly was. The nurses changed every shift, and most treated him like an object. They adjusted tubes, checked charts, and left without a word. Some spoke about him openly, assuming he could not hear. One nurse joked that the world would be better if he never woke up. Another said criminals like him always found a way to escape justice. Victor listened without anger. He had heard worse. He believed he deserved it. The silent room absorbed every word, every judgment, every truth spoken without filters. It was then that one voice stood out, different from the rest, soft but steady. Her name was Lily. She was younger than the others, with tired eyes that showed she had seen too much for her age. When Lily entered the room, the air felt different. She greeted Victor every time, even though she believed he could not respond. She spoke gently, explaining what she was doing before touching him, as if respect still mattered. Victor noticed small things. She fixed his blanket when it slipped. She cleaned the room more carefully. She stayed a little longer than required. There was no fear in her voice, no hatred, no curiosity about his past. To her, he was simply a man lying helpless in a bed. One night, when the hallway was quiet and rain tapped softly against the window, Lily spoke more than usual. She told him about her long shift, about how hospitals never truly slept, and about how silence sometimes scared her more than noise. Victor felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. No one had spoken to him like this in years. Not as a boss, not as a threat, but as a human being. He wanted to open his eyes, to tell her he could hear, but he stopped himself. He needed to understand why she was different. The silent room was still teaching him. Grace, another nurse, often entered after Lily left. Grace was efficient but cold. She spoke loudly, complaining about difficult patients and unfair workloads. One evening, Victor heard her scoff and say Lily was wasting kindness on someone who did not deserve it. People like him don't change, Grace said. Even if he wakes up, he'll go back to being who he is. Lily did not argue, but Victor could sense her discomfort. That conversation stayed with him long after they left. For the first time, he questioned whether Grace was right. Had he ever truly tried to be anything else? As days passed, the silent room became more than a hiding place. It became a space where Victor faced memories he had buried for years. Faces of people he hurt, promises he broke, and lives destroyed by his choices returned to him in the quiet moments. The machines kept beeping, steady and unforgiving, reminding him that time did not stop just because he pretended to be asleep. Lily's presence made those memories harder to ignore. Her kindness did not excuse his past, but it forced him to see it clearly. Lying there, unable to move, Victor realized something painful. Power had never protected him from loneliness. Fear had never earned him loyalty. And silence, the silence he once used to control others, was now teaching him lessons he could no longer escape. The silent room was not just a hospital space. It was a place of truth, and Victor Romano was listening, even when the world believed he could not hear a thing. As the days passed, the silent room began to fill with more than just sounds, it filled with hidden intentions, careless words, and emotions people never planned to reveal. Victor lay still, his breathing slow and controlled, his face calm like stone, but his mind remained sharp. He noticed patterns now. He knew which nurse rushed through her duties, which doctor spoke honestly, and which visitors came only to confirm whether he was truly helpless. The room had become a stage, and everyone who entered played a role without knowing the audience was awake. Doctors discussed his condition openly, sometimes standing at the foot of his bed, sometimes near the door. One said he might never regain consciousness, another suggested moving him to long-term care. Victor realized how quickly a powerful man could be reduced to a case number once he appeared useless. Men from his old world still came occasionally, though less often than before. They stood near the window or leaned against the wall, speaking in low voices that were never low enough. They talked about business disagreements, missing money, and shifting loyalty. One man, someone Victor once trusted deeply, openly discussed taking over his territory if he died. There was no sadness in his voice, only impatience. Victor felt a cold clarity settle inside him. This was the truth he had waited for. These were the people he built his life around, and not one of them spoke of him as a man, only as a problem or an opportunity. The silent room stripped away illusion, leaving only reality behind. In contrast, Lily's visits continued to bring a different energy. She spoke to him every day, sometimes about small things, sometimes about heavier thoughts. She talked about how hospitals showed the real side of people, how sickness removed masks faster than time ever could. She shared stories about patients who fought hard and others who gave up quietly. Victor listened closely, feeling something shift inside him each time she spoke. Her words were simple, but they carried honesty. She never asked him to wake up. She never begged for miracles. She simply treated him as someone still present, still deserving of dignity, even in silence. Grace, however, grew more frustrated with Lily's behavior. Victor often heard Grace complaining at the nurse's station, saying Lily was too emotional, too soft for a place like this. Grace believed rules mattered more than feelings and efficiency mattered more than compassion. One evening, Grace entered the room alone and spoke harshly while checking the machines. She said criminals like Victor were the reason. Innocent people suffered, that some lives did more harm than good. Victor did not feel angry hearing this. Instead, he felt exposed. Her words echoed thoughts he had never allowed himself to face. The silent room did not defend him. It forced him to listen. Late one night, when the hospital was quieter than usual, Lily stayed longer than her shift allowed. She sat beside Victor's bed, holding a clipboard but not reading it. Her eyes looked distant, heavy with thoughts she had been carrying alone. She spoke softly, almost to herself, about how hard it was to keep believing in kindness when the world rewarded cruelty. She said she sometimes wondered if caring too much was a weakness. Victor felt her presence deeply then. For the first time, he understood that Lily was not kind because life had been easy for her. She was kind because life had been hard, and she chose not to let it harden her. As Lily left the room that night, Victor realized something important. The silent room was no longer just revealing others to him, it was revealing himself to himself. Listening to these voices, these truths spoken without fear, he began to see the full weight of his life clearly. The power he once enjoyed felt empty now. The respect he demanded felt meaningless. What stayed with him was Lily's voice, calm and human, reminding him that even in silence, actions mattered. And as the door closed and the room returned to quiet, Victor knew this silence was changing him in ways violence and power never could. The night it happened was heavier than the others, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rain pressed against the hospital windows, and distant thunder rolled softly across the sky. The hallway outside Victor's room was nearly empty, the usual noise replaced by long stretches of silence broken only by footsteps and the slow rhythm of machines. Victor lay exactly as he always did, unmoving, eyes closed, pretending to be lost somewhere far away. Inside, however, his mind was alert, sharpened by weeks of listening and watching without being seen. He had learned that night brought out truths people hid during the day, and the silent room was most honest when darkness fell. Lily entered quietly, closing the door behind her more gently than usual. Victor sensed something was wrong the moment she stepped closer. Her movements were slower, her breathing uneven. When she sat beside his bed, she did not begin speaking right away. She simply stared at the floor, gripping the edge of the chair as if holding herself together required effort. The machines continued their steady beeping, unaware of the weight building in the room. Finally, Lily reached out and took Victor's hand, her fingers cold and trembling. She believed, as always, that he could not feel or hear her, and that belief gave her the courage to speak. Her voice broke as soon as she began. She said she was tired of carrying things alone, tired of being strong in a world that rarely rewarded it. She talked about growing up in a small home where silence meant survival and about learning early that tears were something you shed in private. Victor felt her pain in every word. This was not the careful, professional voice she used during the day. This was raw and unguarded. The silent room held her confession without judgment, the same way it had held so many others. Then Lily spoke a name that changed everything. She said Ava, and her grip tightened around Victor's hand. She explained that Ava was her younger sister, full of life and dreams, someone who believed the world could be better than it was. Ava had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught between people who carried power like weapons and treated consequences as someone else's problem. Lily's voice shook as she described the night Ava never came home, the phone call. The hospital visit that felt cruelly familiar, and the moment she realized no apology would ever bring her sister back. Victor's chest tightened. He had heard stories like this before, but never from someone sitting so close, never with such honesty. As tears fell freely down Lily's face, she spoke about anger she did not know how to release. She admitted she hated the kind of world that allowed men like Victor Romano to rise while people like Ava paid the price. She said she hated the fear, the corruption, and the silence that followed violence. But then her voice softened, and she confessed something that surprised even herself. She said she could not bring herself to hate the man lying in front of her. She did not know why. Maybe it was because he was powerless now, or maybe because caring for him reminded her that every story had a human beginning, even the darkest ones. That confusion hurt her almost as much as the loss. Victor listened, every word cutting deeper than any wound he had suffered before. This was not an accusation shouted in anger or a threat whispered in fear. This was grief speaking honestly. The silent room gave him no escape. He could not deny her story or distance himself from it. Lily's tears soaked into the sheets, and with them came the weight of responsibility Victor had avoided his entire life. He realized that while he may not have known Ava personally, his world had made her death possible. His choices had helped shape the system that took her away. When Lily finally stood to leave, exhausted and emptied, she gently placed Victor's hand back at his side. She apologized for saying too much, for letting her emotions take control. The door closed behind her, and the room returned to silence. But this silence was different. It was heavy with truth, with pain that could not be unheard. Victor lay there, eyes still closed, body still unmoving, but inside, everything had changed. The silent room had delivered its harshest lesson yet, and Victor knew that pretending to be asleep would never be the same again. Morning light slowly crept through the thin hospital curtains, casting pale shadows across the silent room. Victor had not slept. Lily's words echoed in his mind again and again, each memory refusing to fade. For the first time since he had chosen to pretend, the silence no longer felt like protection. It felt like a lie he could no longer carry. His body remained still out of habit, but his thoughts were restless, heavy with guilt and clarity. The machines beside him continued their steady rhythm, unaware that the man they monitored had reached a breaking point. The silent room, once a place of observation, had become a place of decision. Doctors entered during the morning round, speaking in calm, professional tones about his condition, his chances, and the next steps if there was no improvement. Grace stood with them, her expression serious and distant. She adjusted the 4 and noted numbers on a chart, never once looking at Victor's face. As they spoke about him as if he were already gone, something inside Victor hardened. He realized that staying silent meant allowing others to control the story of his life, just as he had once controlled theirs. The power felt different now. It no longer satisfied him. It only reminded him of everything he had avoided. When the doctors left and the room emptied again, Victor made his choice. Slowly, with effort that surprised even him, his fingers twitched. The movement was small, but it felt louder than any gunshot he had ever heard. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. Light flooded his vision, sharp and overwhelming after so long in darkness. The room blurred for a moment, then settled. He was awake, truly awake, not just physically but mentally. There was no turning back now. Grace returned first. She stopped mid-step when she saw his eyes open, her face draining of color. She froze, unsure whether to call for help or speak. Victor turned his head slightly and met her gaze. There was no threat in his eyes, no familiar cold authority. Only exhaustion and something that looked like regret. Grace quickly called for the doctors, her voice shaking as she spoke. Within minutes, the room filled with movement and noise, nurses rushing in, doctors asking questions, machines being checked again. Victor answered slowly, calmly, his voice weak but clear. Each word felt like a confession. Lily arrived shortly after, her shift just beginning. She stood at the doorway, watching the chaos settle. When she realized Victor was awake, her breath caught in her throat. Fear, shock, and confusion crossed her face all at once. Victor noticed her immediately. Even surrounded by people, she was the only one he truly saw. When the room finally quieted and the doctor stepped aside, Victor asked for a moment alone with her. The request surprised everyone, but his tone left no room for argument. Lily stood beside his bed, unsure of what to say. Victor turned toward her slowly, carefully, as if every movement carried meaning now. He told her he had heard her that night. He did not interrupt or explain right away. He simply acknowledged her pain. He said Ava's name with respect, not as a story, but as a person. Lily's eyes filled with tears again, this time from shock rather than grief. She stepped back, overwhelmed, but Victor continued. He said he was sorry, not as a strategy, not to be forgiven, but because it was the truth. He admitted that his world had caused damage beyond what he ever allowed himself to see. The room felt different then, charged with honesty. Grace watched from a distance, unable to recognize the man she had judged so easily. Victor asked for a lawyer, but not to protect himself. He said he wanted to take responsibility. He spoke about ending what he had built, about revealing truths that would dismantle his empire. Lily listened in silence, unsure whether to believe him, but something in his voice told her this was not an act. The silent room had finally done its work. Victor Romano had awakened, not just from a coma, but from the life he had been hiding behind. Time moved differently after Victor woke up, as if the world had slowed to watch what he would do next. The hospital room was no longer silent in the same way, it was filled with conversations, paperwork, and careful supervision. Authorities became regular visitors, their questions direct and serious. Victor answered them without hesitation. He spoke about names, locations, deals, and crimes that had remained hidden for years. Each confession felt heavy, but also strangely relieving. For the first time in his life, he was not using power to escape consequences. He was accepting them. Grace watched this change with quiet disbelief. She had expected denial, manipulation, or violence. Instead, she saw a man willingly dismantling everything that once made him feared. Lily kept her distance during those early days. She did her job professionally but spoke little, unsure how to process what had happened. The man who had listened silently to her pain was now awake and facing the truth she had revealed. Victor understood her silence and did not push for forgiveness or comfort. He knew some wounds were too deep for words. When he was strong enough to be moved, he was transferred under guard to a medical wing within a prison facility. The walls were colder, the rules stricter, but the quiet there felt honest. There were no pretending eyes, no hidden intentions. Only time and reflection. Months passed, and Victor's world continued to shrink. His empire was gone, taken apart piece by the truth he had chosen to reveal. News reports spoke of arrests and long-buried cases finally finding justice. Victor followed none of it closely. His focus had shifted inward. He spent long hours thinking about the people affected by his choices, especially Ava. Her name stayed with him like a weight and a guide, reminding him that real lives existed beyond ambition and fear. The silence in the prison hospital was different from the silence he once used as a weapon. This silence taught patience and humility. One afternoon, Lily visited. Not as a nurse, but as herself. She sat across from him, her posture cautious but steady. She told him she did not come to forgive or forget. She came because she needed to see whether his change was real. Victor did not argue or defend himself. He told her he understood if forgiveness never came. He said some actions deserved to remain unforgiven. Lily listened carefully. She spoke about Ava again, about how loss never truly leaves but changes shape over time. She admitted that seeing Victor take responsibility did not heal her pain, but it reminded her that truth still mattered. Grace later admitted to Lily that she had been wrong about people never changing. Watching Victor face the consequences of his life without excuses had challenged her beliefs. She realized that kindness and accountability were not weaknesses, but choices that required courage. Victor never asked for praise or sympathy. His reward was knowing he had stopped running. The story of the Mafia boss who pretended to be in a coma did not end with redemption or romance. It ended with responsibility. And in that quiet acceptance, Victor found something he had never known before, a life after silence, built not on fear, but on truth.